While her mother-in-law was asleep, the woman took a blanket and firmly pressed it over her face. Her daughter, hearing the commotion from the room, rushed in to stop her mother. The rest of the family, alarmed by the sounds, hurried to pull her away. Failing to carry out her plan, the woman broke down in tears.
어머니, 나 죽으면 어떻게 살래? 나 죽으면 어떻게 살래? 어머니, 나랑 같이 죽자.
Like many women, he was a housewife, completely consumed by endless household chores, with no time for herself. Every family member seemed to add to her stress. Her son, who had failed his college entrance exams twice, spent his days drinking excessively, passing out in his room and leaving messes for her to clean. Her daughter, though beautiful and successful at work, was in love with a married man and had resigned herself to being the other woman. Her husband, unsurprisingly, had a strong streak of traditional masculinity, staying completely uninvolved in family matters, focused solely on his work. But the person who required the most from her was her mother-in-law. Suffering from dementia, she needed constant care and often lashed out, even hurling insults when he was simply trying to take her to the bathroom.
마음 안 좋아서? 날 아주 숨겨 죽여라. 필 먹으려라. 곧 나간다니까.
Any minor misstep could lead to being hit. Changing her mother-in-law's diapers had become another ordeal. If he delayed even slightly, her mother-in-law would tear them off, making a mess everywhere. The entire household felt as if it were on the brink of collapse, held together only by Inhe's tireless efforts. And she had endured it for 15 years. One day, Inhe told her husband that she was experiencing pain and pressure during urination and wanted to get checked at the hospital where he worked. Her husband, however, suggested she go to the local clinic instead. When she explained that it was the clinic doctor who recommended a hospital visit, he just turned away coldly without saying much. After settling her mother-in-law, Inhe made her way to the hospital and found Professor Yoon, a friend of her husband's. During the examination, Yoon's expression turned serious. To be thorough, he ordered a CT scan. That evening, Inhe waited for her husband to finish work, cherishing the rare moment alone with him. She tried chatting happily, but he barely responded, showing no interest in what she was saying. As soon as they got home, Professor Yoon called.
아야, 무슨 일이야?
지금 병원 좀 나오세요. 드릴 말씀 있어요.
At the hospital, Professor Yoon delivered the news. Inhe had ovarian cancer that had already spread to other organs. Her husband, unable to believe it, insisted on looking at the scans himself. The diagnosis hit him like a bolt of lightning. He remembered how his wife had complained of discomfort before, and how he'd dismissed it, suggesting she just get some over-the-counter medication at the clinic. Now, he felt he was nothing short of a monster. Walking home, he was overcome with grief and began sobbing uncontrollably, a rare, raw expression from someone who had always been so silent and repressed. When he arrived, he found his mother lashing out at Inhe once again. He quietly asked his mother a question, his voice steadied yet filled with newfound resolve.
왜 이 여자를 못 잡은 모습 평생 그래? 평생. 예? 도대체 못마땅한 게 뭐야? 말해봐.
왜 그래요? 어?
말해봐요! 이 사람이 뭘 주고 때려줬어? 무슨 잘못이 그렇게 있다고?
The mother was startled and quickly apologized, but Inhe scolded her husband for treating an elderly person that way. Just then, their drunken son stumbled in, looking disheveled. Seeing his son's state, the father slapped him, demanding to know how much longer he planned on making his mother take care of him. Inhe tried to speak up for their son, but her husband turned on her, scolding her as well.
지금 누굴 가르치려고 들어? 지금 하나 가수 못해서 언제 죽을지도 모르는 게!
Inhe couldn't understand why her husband was acting this way, and their children were also baffled. They had never even considered the possibility of losing their mother. But the husband couldn't shake the thought. He couldn't imagine what their family would be like without his wife. Refusing to give up, he took her to a larger hospital for further testing, clinging to the hope that a miracle might still be possible. However, reality doesn't often allow for miracles, and this story was no different. The diagnosis came back the same, late-stage cancer. Confiding in his friend, the husband expressed his desire to go ahead with surgery, hoping it could offer some relief for Inhe, even if only to ease the pain she felt when using the bathroom. His friend cautioned him that the cancer was too advanced, and surgery might actually worsen her condition. But determined to do anything, the husband insisted, and his friend reluctantly scheduled the surgery for 3 days later. Meanwhile, Inhe remained blissfully unaware of her condition. She visited the new house they were building and imagined a future where the family would live happily together. That evening, her husband came home to find her scrubbing the floor while their daughter sat idly nearby. Frustrated, he took the rag and tossed it to their daughter, telling her to do the cleaning. When she didn't move,
너 왜 안 해? 네가 무슨 공주야? 기집애가 돼가지고 집안일 하나 돌보질 않는 거야. 네 엄마가 종이냐? 그래? 네 엄마가 네 눈에 종으로 보여?
and he stepped in to defend her, scolding her husband loudly. Overwhelmed and feeling misunderstood, the husband took his wife outside and, unable to hide it any longer, told her the truth about her diagnosis. When Inhi asked if it was early stage, he couldn't bring himself to answer. Seeing no signs of illness, she assumed it was caught early. The husband, watching her optimism, decided to keep the full truth to himself, assuring her that everything would be fine after the surgery. Meanwhile, the daughter had learned about the surgery from her aunt. She confronted her father, wanting to know the truth.
하면 괜찮은 거 맞죠? 믿어도 되는 거죠, 그 말씀?
그렇다잖아.
On the day of Inhi's hospital visit, her mother-in-law, acting out of character, clung to her leg, pleading tearfully to go with her, as if sensing this could be their last time together. The surgery began, and the husband watched anxiously, his hope fading as he saw the reality of her condition.
배 탔자.
In the recovery room, the family was talking and laughing, assuming Inhi was out of danger and feeling a sense of relief. But her husband couldn't bring himself to join them. He had avoided coming home for days, preferring to drown himself in work, unable to face the reality of his wife's condition. Unable to watch his friends suffer in silence, Professor Yoon urged the husband to be honest with the children and give them a chance to say goodbye to their mother. As painful as it was, he reminded him that everyone, including his wife, deserved the right to say goodbye. After some reflection, the father broke the news to their daughter, revealing that her mother didn't have much time left.
얼마나 예상하는데요?
한 달.
The daughter was devastated and angry, blaming her father for not realizing the severity of her mother's condition sooner.
어떻게 그럴 수가 있어요? 아버지가 의사신데. 어떻게 엄마가 그 지경까지 갈 수가 있냐고요?
She found herself grieving as she looked at her mother's favorite pizza, remembering how she'd never even thought to buy it for her before. Overwhelmed, the father broke down, weeping openly for the second time. The daughter, holding onto a shred of hope, sought out Professor Yoon, doubting her father's diagnosis because of a past medical mistake he'd made. Yet, after hearing the professor's confirmation, she had to face the truth. Her mother couldn't be saved. Swallowing her grief, she told her brother. Upon learning that his mother was nearing the end, the son fell apart even more than his sister. Unlike her, he had barely begun to honor his mother. He hadn't gotten into college, never gave her spending money, and had done nothing to make her proud. In his heartbreak, he turned to his father, pleading with him to find a way to keep his mother alive until the exam results came out. He was sure he'd passed this time and wanted her to see it, but the father could only look at him, helpless to fulfill his wish.
딱 한 번만 기회를 주세요. 딱 한 번만. 엄마한테 잘할 수 있는 기회를.
One day, Inhi's gambling-addicted younger brother came to her, demanding 10 million won. When she refused, he angrily accused her of hoarding their parents' money and not sharing it with him, even though he had already squandered it all. He spitefully said that her illness was karma for her greed. Heartbroken, Inhi threw him her last bit of cash.
엄마 길디 피곤이야.
Later, her husband arrived at the hospital and told her she could be discharged the next day. Inhi scolded him for taking so long to visit, but this time he didn't argue back. He simply listened in silence. When Inhi took her medicine, she noticed 2 of her cancer pills were missing. Thinking it was an oversight, she started to go ask the doctor, but her husband quietly admitted it was his decision.
당신 그 약 먹고 병이 안 있었다면서. 그래서 내가 그 약 주지 말라 그랬어.
약 먹는 게 아무리 힘들어도 아픈 사람이 약을 먹어야지 낫지.
Seeing his wife fight so fiercely pained him deeply, but there was nothing he could do to ease her suffering. Inhi pleaded with the nurse to get her the missing pills, and after a call to the doctor, she finally received them. She was thrilled, unaware they were just digestive pills. Late that night, Inhi's pain kept her from sleeping, and she tried to eat something, hoping it would help her feel better. She imagined that once she was well, she'd give her husband a piece of her mind. After being discharged, Inhi's health declined rapidly, with bruises spreading across her legs. One night, she ran to the bathroom and began vomiting blood. Terrified, she called for her husband. When he arrived, she clung to him in agony. Their son and daughter rushed downstairs. helpless as they watched their mother suffer, unable to do anything but collapse in tears. He entrusted her husband with the family's finances, telling him which card was for their daughter's dowry and which one was for their son's future wedding. She settled all her affairs, even summoning her sister-in-law to ask her to stay by her brother's side. She handed her a life insurance policy, which later caused her sister-in-law to collapse in sorrow. Seeing her husband laugh as he counted his gambling winnings, she angrily threw the insurance policy at him.
네 누나 죽는데 이거 네 누나가 자기 죽으면 너 주려고 식구들 몰래 들어오는 거래. 알아 이 새끼야. 혜야 네가 그 마음을 알겠다. 혜야 너가 들으니까 네 누나 마음을 알겠다.
The one person he couldn't stop worrying about was her mother-in-law, who remained oblivious to Inhe's condition and continued to cause trouble as usual. Inhe couldn't bear to imagine who would look after her once she was gone. That evening, Inhe was delighted to meet her son's girlfriend, showering the girl with compliments. Just as the family returned home in high spirits, her mother-in-law, who had been lurking by the door, suddenly struck Inhe on the head with a stick, drawing blood. Her grandson quickly restrained her. Her husband, fed up, grabbed a hammer and forcibly dragged his mother into her room, hammering the door shut. Ignoring her cries, he thought about how much his wife had sacrificed for this family and how, even as she neared death, she still couldn't find peace. Late that night, Inhe went to check on her mother-in-law, covering her with a blanket as she slept. Watching her peacefully, Inhe reflected on the years they had spent together, feeling a pang of sorrow. She wondered who would care for her mother-in-law once she was gone, remembering the times when her mother-in-law had once told her to take her alone. Inhe hardened her heart, picked up a blanket, and pressed it firmly over her mother-in-law's face. After being saved, the mother-in-law uncharacteristically calmed down. Quiet and still, she didn't make a fuss. As she washed her mother-in-law's face, Rinchi apologized softly, telling her how sorry she was.
정신 드실 때 나 따라와. 너는 아범이랑 애들 고생시키지 말고.
In the following days, Rinchi's husband arranged their new home just as she had wanted and learned how to care for his mother. Their daughter put her career on hold to take care of household chores. While she worked, Rinchi would call her name over and over, and her daughter always responded, again and again. Rinchi's face often grew wet with silent tears, the mother afraid she would never get to call her daughter's name again, the daughter afraid she might never hear it again. Even Rinchi's brother finally woke up to reality. He quit gambling, started driving a cab, but couldn't gather the courage to visit her. Instead, he asked his wife to deliver a box of her favorite cookies, and as he sat in his car, his tears flowed like a river breaking its banks. In her final days, Rinchi's family decided to take her to the new home. She went to say goodbye to her mother-in-law, who this time just sat quietly, no longer fighting or shouting, simply watching her daughter-in-law leave. Together, the four of them visited the sea, capturing precious memories in photos, their laughter ringing out like it hadn't in years. In the car, Rinchi said goodbye to her son, asking him to call her mom, and telling him to always remember to be strong. After he stepped out, she broke down in tears, turning to her daughter and whispering how much she loved her. As the children left, her husband stayed to share their final moments alone. Over the next few days, he prepared her meals, bathed her, washed her hair, and they spent time together in the sunlight, sipping tea, moments like they hadn't shared in what felt like forever. That night, sitting by her bed, she asked him when he would remember her most. He replied, choking back tears, when I sleep, when I wake up, when I'm sick, when I'm lonely. He listed moment after moment, each one heavy with the love he had kept inside. The next morning, he gently called her name, but there was no answer. Rinchi had quietly slipped away, leaving him alone. Many of us are so busy with our own lives that we overlook those who quietly give their all for us. As husbands, as children, don't let regret only come in the final moments. Don't wait until love is about to be lost before learning to cherish it. Never take their devotion for granted. Let's all live without regrets. If you love, let it be known. Don't let love go unspoken until it's too late.